In a recent seminar organized by the Our Hong Kong Foundation, Dr. Victor Fung, Group Chairman of the Fung Group, shared his expert views on how Hong Kong, which has played key roles in the trade and growth of both China and Asia, should adapt to the new global economic environment. Dr. Fung also outlines the city's new vision as a trading center and global supply chain orchestrator under post-pandemic conditions.
Thanks so much, Dr. Fung, for joining us.
Morning, Stephen.
Good morning.
It's great to be among friends and colleagues.
Great, thank you. We're going to have a chat on the important topics. A lot of things have changes in COVID, a lot of opportunities and challenges. And first, post-pandemic, well, looking forward, or during this pandemic, we don't know how long it will last. How is the global supply chain changing? And what do you see as the new normal in your industry?
Oh, wow, this is a big question.
Yes.
I think the global supply chains are really, as a result of this crisis, but maybe even before then, has undergone really radical change. Let me mention two factors that are even before the COVID. First, I think there's a whole trend of digitalization. In my mind, that has been going on for at least 15 years in the world.
Right.
And the supply chain, starting from the part that is, closest to the consumer, as we all know, is being increasingly digitized, and then now moving upstream, so that the whole supply chain from end to end is now being completely digitized. Now, what that really brings about is a radical change, quite apart from anything else in itself, because of the way technology is being used, because of the way the consumer is acting today. The whole thing has already, undergo a major change.
Can you give a bit example? Are you talking about sort of online sampling, people using virtual reality to look at the factories
you
and that sort of things?
Use all those technologies, of course, but the fundamental proposition is very simple. This machine here has now enabled the consumer, and the consumer is now driving the supply chain from the consumer end. It's a consumer pull. It used to be that the people with the ideas and the designs and the brands would be pushing the supply chain.
I see.
From the idea down. Now it's being pulled. So the real changes that we're seeing in the supply chain is a complete emphasis on, first of all, speed.
Okay.
Because as you know, you buy something on the web or anywhere, you want it within 24, 48 hours.
Right.
The clock speed has completely changed, and it's able to change because of technology. The second is the whole idea of actually now being able to individualize what the consumer needs, into large number of very small market niches, means that the whole supply chain needs to adjust to very small minimum order quantities, like 100 pieces per style, instead of 100,000 pieces of style. So this is a radical change. Now, the second thing is a little more recent, but we're all very familiar with it, which is the trade tensions around the world, especially the U.S.-China trade tension, which originated about 3 years ago. And that has also radically changed the supply chain. It has really, moved a lot of different, shall we say, places where people want to actually finish the final stage of the product. And that actually has been in train. And of course, if you're actually doing everything in China, for example, and it's made in China, country of origin, then when you go to the United States, they have imposed very high duties. So you may want to do all the stages except the last stage, doing enough in another country, like Southeast Asia and Vietnam. So in fact, it becomes a Vietnam country of origin, and then you ship. So it's really completely redistributed the supply chain.
Right. Can I pick up on this because I hear
Yeah.
mixed studies on the relocation of this production. Some people say that there's, significant production, let's say to Vietnam or even Malaysia, but some people would say that, hey, this is, the relocation is less than what people have expected. Can you?
Okay, I can certainly do that. Let me complete the final point, which is with the COVID.
Right. Yep.
I think everything has been accelerated. And really, the whole global economy, as you know, has been under a lot of pressure. Although I'm seeing now a little light at the end of the tunnel. Now, so to answer your question now, it's actually moved in stages. Because when the trade war first came in, we saw the geographic spread, right? And then and especially when China had the initial issue in the first quarter with COVID.
Right.
However, when China completely controlled the COVID, and the COVID also moved to Southeast Asia, you know what? Things began moving back to China because they couldn't.
Right.
Yeah. And even in the first stage, China was actually still continuing with the exports because the components were still coming from China. So Southeast Asia is now recovering also and controlling COVID. It's becoming a little more normal situation, except the demand has now changed, right?
Right.
Originally, the demand was holding up in both Europe and America. And now the demand has now fallen. So you got to now go into really where's the new demand, and that, of course, is Asia. So really the conclusion there, Stephen, is it's not whether it's going to be here or move in one direction and that's it. I think what we really need to emphasize is the flexibility, the so-called agility in the supply chain, and the ability to move with the moving environment. Yeah, and then being able to be very robust or very resilient, so it doesn't break even when there are shocks.
So in order to increase the flexibility and robustness and resilience, and some people coin this term China plus one, to diversify the production base. Is it happening or is it just a
the Japanese,
fancy term?
especially our Japanese business friends have coined this term, I think, for more than a decade.
Okay.
And this has been happening. And I think now you have to say it's not only China plus one, it's China plus many. People don't say, that's not the real issue. The whole issue is flexibility. And in fact, the so-called China plus one policy, if you really think about it, was also China's national policy for at least a decade. Remember during the period when Mr. Wang Yang was the governor of the party secretary of Guangdong, he had the whole concept of changing the bird in the cage, which is basically, in a sense, really downloading the final, more labor-intensive stage of the production process, and then for China to actually move up the value chain and do the components and the upstream, which is much more technologically driven, much more high value added. And that actually has been ongoing Chinese government policy. And now it's in a sense, being completed because of what's happened in the last few years.
Is it also aligned with what you sort of told me before, that this is changing from the made in China to managed by China?
Okay, now you're talking about another concept. Yes, absolutely. China used to be the factory of the world, and everything then moved to being made in China. Now I think everything is not necessarily finished in China, but China has a very big influence on the total supply chain. And in fact, that is very much the Hong Kong story.
Right.
Remember at the time of the reunification, we had a movement from made in Hong Kong to made by Hong Kong. What that really means is that the supply chains are now being radically outsourced. It's not necessarily just finished in China, not made in China, but China is supplying the components, China is supplying the concepts, the designs, perhaps later on even the brands, and it's also supplying the entrepreneurs many of which are SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, that would actually execute. So the whole concept is not necessarily a product that is completely done in China, but it's by China and using China component, using China expertise on a regional basis or global basis. So made by China.
Made by China. And is it also, in this new normal of trade tariffs and managed by China, made by China, does it also mean that, and because of the consumer market in China you mentioned, can you also talk a little bit about this concept of the reshoring and nearshoring of productions?
Yes. Well, this is something that frankly has born out of the concerns about the epidemic and the use of the medical-related equipment and so on, what people call a PPE. In fact, the idea that when you look at the range of products, some products are important enough to be kept domestically and done only in the country. A very extreme example, of course, anything to do with technology, to do with the defense. Obviously, you want to control that within your own national boundaries.
Right.
So this is not a new concept. What is now happening is because of the pandemic, the people are saying maybe more needs to be kept and maybe need to pull back, to be reshored, to be now national production. So really what's happening to the world today, in my mind, is you look at all the products, there's probably two categories. One category is what I would call essential products. Those are like the defense and the medical, the PPE, and maybe even some aspects of food safety that you want to at least keep those. Those could be definitely reshored and would be nationally controlled. However, there's going to be a whole slew of non-essential products. Things that everyday life, your shirt, your shoes, etc. It does not make sense for shoes to be made in Wisconsin, right? My own view is, if there's some reshoring of essential products, which is inevitable, the non-essential products will in fact be even more globalized. And in fact, you would want to take advantage of the globalization of those products in order to reduce the cost of those, to balance the cost of reshoring some of the essential products. So that's how the world is now moving. So the concern at one point that everything will be reshored is totally unfounded. Now, of course, behind all this is also the issue of jobs, of course. And that is also another factor. But that factor doesn't drive this whole reshoring.
Interesting.
And what you may also see is a concept called nearshoring, which is to produce, if a major market is in the United States, a nearshoring market may be Mexico or the Caribbean, where you can actually finish the products near the major market. So it could fly or be transported into the major markets very quickly. And that, frankly, is much more in response to consumer demand. Again, the idea that I said earlier about clock speed and the consumer wanting instant gratification. If I order something, it better be delivered in the next 24 hours. So the nearshoring concept is probably what's going to be the norm in the future.
That's very interesting. Can we also talk about business? Given this digital technological advance that you guys have been working on for many years already, but would that sort of bring about more further disintermediation, and how can one sort of work with this changing technological advancement in the digital supply chain that you guys been looking at for a long time?
Well, I think digitalization is going to be inevitable. And I think really the question is how you adapt it to the new environment. And the most important thing that I can think of is what I said about the behavior of the consumer, that the supply chains are being much more consumer pull, market pull, rather than product push. And really, as you know, if you look at the whole supply chain from the idea of a product to actually the consumer, the downstream is almost completely digitalized.
Right.
I always carry a blue pen, and I always use this as demonstration.
Okay.
See, if you look at from idea to consumer, somewhere in this long chain, the product actually appears. The idea of a blue pen, the blue pen appears. And then now if you look at the blue pen to the consumer, that's almost completely digitized. Alibaba, JD, Amazon, etc.
Right.
However, if you think about the whole concept of if you have an idea, and then creating the product, the upstream portion of the supply chain, that actually is still very analog.
Oh.
You see? And only pieces of it is digitized. So what we've been concentrating on is now the digitalization of the upstream part. Now, if you do that part, and then you have an open interface, you can actually hook up with any one of a number of downstream digitized, and then you have end-to-end.
Right.
And I think that's really going to be the way we would harness the technology to work for us. And I think, and the many technologies that is now being absorbed. For example, at Li & Fung, we're now the whole design process, which is the part that takes the longest time in the whole end-to-end chain, from idea to consumer. It takes the bulk of the time because of the design. You want to make samples, see if it's the right design. That is now completely digitalized. But we're using about 30 technologies put together in a platform to actually make that digitalization. And now you can actually design a product within 24 hours. And used to be weeks or months. So this is really what's happening, and you're responding to the global environment.
Interesting. Some people said that the COVID accelerate this digitization of the upstream that you mentioned because people don't want to see each other. But in terms of the design and sampling, some people argue though, it's hard to do it online because you have to feel the texture of the garment and that sort of things before you.
That is exactly, that is the advance of technology. The use of AI, for example. What is very hard to do is when you have an object and you can actually even, let's say you're designing a shoe, you can even rotate it with different light. However, if you're wearing a dress, if you're looking at a dress, the dress has to drape. And when you walk, it has to move, right? Doing that part of the digitalization is the hardest. It's actually at the cutting edge of AI. So the thing I want to emphasize is when you improve the global supply chain like this, it means that there's a lot of new jobs that are created along the supply chains. So the whole supply chain idea is not just the whole idea of just manufacturing and sewing. When you think about how you've digitized the design process, it creates a huge number of jobs just on different aspects of using and integrating a technology.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and that really says, if the digitization may replace jobs, yes, I'm sure it'll be different jobs, but you're actually creating perhaps even more jobs than you lose.
Yeah, I want to talk more about Hong Kong later, but at this point it's important because to be a good sourcing hub in Hong Kong to continue its role, people didn't realize that we need to actually invest into R&D and technology that actually play a role in that, because usually we think about technology in other manufacturing aspect, but what you're talking about, it's even in the design and all this AI will utilize a lot of technology.
I think that's where most of it is actually used. Yeah.
Right.
At least a lot of it. It's a huge part of the whole process.
Another role,
and that's where we excel in Hong Kong, by the way.
Yes, that's great. Another thing that Hong Kong plays is obviously finance, and you mentioned trade finance is one of the key area that we have to deal with. Can you address this problem of what's going on in trade finance?
Yeah. Let me again, perhaps Stephen, put that in perspective. What we're really now seeing in terms of global trade today is, I think we're seeing light at the end of the tunnel for potential revival. Okay. In fact, I think the key to the revival of the global economy is first of all, the revival of trade. I think trade is what's going to lead the revival of the global economy. First point I want to mention is the importance of trade and making that the centerpiece, the centrality of trade, because that actually helps, the supply chains that are producing goods both for domestic consumption and for export are the things that actually get the economy going. Okay. Now, trade in the first quarter, I mean, people were afraid that the trade could drop, 10, 20, 30%, which was never happened. But still, it's less than last year. It's not even, I think it'll drop about maybe between 9 and 10%.
Okay.
Okay, but it's recovering. We're seeing light at the end of the tunnel. The point I want to make is, if we want to sustain this recovery, it is very important at this stage now to put a very important ingredient. Now we're running up against the constraint of maybe that demand, maybe people can produce. However, we cannot facilitate the trade because there's a shortage of trade finance.
Okay.
Now, if that doesn't come, the whole thing may peter off. So that is, I want to put that in perspective. We saw that actually in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. The world almost came to a standstill, not because of lack of demand back then, not because of lack of supply, but because of lack of trade finance. And for a number of reasons, the banks were under pressure. In fact, the rules in Basel III had a very punitive amount of allocation of capital against trade receivables and things like that. Anyway, a lot of issues. But the world actually, the G20 at that time, remember there was a meeting in London of the G20, actually did a concerted action among all the governments in the world to actually increase the amount of export credit insurance in the world and completely lifted the world out of this danger. So fast forward to today, same problem, slightly different. There's plenty of liquidity in the banks, frankly, because people have been printing so much money.
Right.
Plenty of liquidity. The problem is the banks are reluctant to lend, especially to SMEs, because of credit issues.
Right.
So it's still the amount of trade finance available to where it counts, which is really primarily the SMEs, okay, is still not happening. And we really need to do a lot of concerted effort. And really the world, I've been very much associated with the International Chamber of Commerce. They have formed a global group to try and really talk to the governments, the G20 and the multilaterals, like WTO and World Bank, to actually do a coordinated effort. I think we may need, for example, to do another major effort to get all the export credit insurers, like Hong Kong's ECIC, which, by the way, stepped up dramatically during the last crisis, to continue now, and they're doing it. But it's not just, it's like Coface in France, Euler Hermes, et cetera, and Sinosure in China, et cetera. So we're now on the verge of a recovery. It has to be nurtured, and we need to have trade finances playing a very important role.
Can I follow up on that? Because as you said previously, it was a liquidity issue, and therefore, the export credit, they step up to solve more of a liquidity issue. And now we are dealing with credit issue.
That is, it was both.
It was both.
Yeah.
But now credit issues really stem from the fact that people are concerned about the contracting demands, overseas in the U.S. or in Europe, and people don't see it, don't see the light at the tunnel as well. So how do we solve that demand contraction and therefore have credit losses and that sort of thing?
It's not, the demand is being sustained quite well.
Okay, even in
but
the US.
It could be disrupted very quickly because of lockdown. You see?
Yeah.
So if I'm a lender and I'm looking at the SME, how do I know that the order that you're doing now doesn't get canceled?
Right.
Or when you ship the order, all of a sudden the buyer, the retailer that's bought the order, which I discounted that receivable, all of a sudden go out of business.
Right.
So that is the uncertainty. But the fundamental demand, believe it or not, actually, global trade is actually recovering.
Right.
And by the way, if you dig a little deeper, a lot of it is because of trade in PPE. It's a big component now.
Right.
But I have to say that the demand for basic products are still there.
Right.
People still need to eat. They still need to, and they're buying things on the web.
Right.
The e-commerce sales in America, for example, has gone over 30% of retail sales, and I think it will be sustained there.
Right. So would you therefore argue that even there are disruptions and therefore resulted in some credit losses, some of these retailers might go into bankruptcies, whatever. There might be some credit loss. The global government still need to step up and do this.
Yeah. Now let me go one step further, maybe making a slightly more controversial thought. You see, we are in a position now where we may need to actually help the real economy with fiscal measures to support, right? And in particular the SMEs. So the question is how you spend that money. Now, what I'm arguing is if you spend that money in the form of actually giving export credit guarantees or other things, you may in fact sustain a pretty large credit loss.
Right.
However, I think that's a better way to spend the money than direct subsidies.
Yeah.
Because you know why? There's a huge multiply effect.
Right.
Once you get the supply chain going, there may be 40 people in the supply chain. And there's a multiplier effect. So you are going to spend money anyway. You need a fiscal response to help the economy. It's how you spend it. Do you want to spend it direct or you spend it this way? Which gives you the multiplier effect.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, and so I'm not arguing that there's one way to get around the credit losses. But over the long term, I think there is, because then big data plays. Then you can actually gather enough information about the performance of even individual SMEs over time, maybe 3 years, 5 years. The big data will come in, and then you may be able to make better credit judgments, based on the performance of individual units in the system, like individual SMEs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can we shift our topic into this new strategy called dual circulation strategy that is mentioned in the 14th five-year plan in mainland China?
Yeah.
And so what are the vision and sort of what does that mean for GBA or Hong Kong in your view?
Oh.
It's a big topic.
You want the 2-minute version or the 2-hour version?
2-minute version.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's going to be the 2-minute version. Now, frankly, this is going to be the key, I think, for the next stage of China's development. I have no doubt that this will be the core of the 14th five-year plan, which will be, which now being discussed. We're all looking to provide input, and also it will be promulgated during the Liang Hui in March of next year. I think what it really gets to is the heart of the balance between the domestic economy and the global economy. First of all, it is not what some of the international media might have said. This is a complete orientation to a closed domestic economy. It absolutely is still the linkage. Maybe what's happening is the emphasis.
Yeah.
Maybe it was very big emphasis on the external economy in the past, but now we want to actually have a little more balance. But the linkage definitely has to be there.
Right.
And let me bring this home to something that is very close to business's heart and close to Hong Kong business heart. In fact, that will illustrate where this could actually be implemented and where Hong Kong can make a real difference in this dual circulation. You remember, again, about 10 years ago, you have the China's manufacturing sector, the complete manufacturing, was actually split into two worlds. One world actually are in the economic zones that manufacture only for export. Another world is factories doing domestic manufacturing. It's actually very, very funny.
Right.
It's true. And you can't sell into the other. Now, there was a big push by especially businesses in Hong Kong, because we have a lot of products that we manufacture for export. We want to sell domestic.
Yeah.
This is 10 years ago now. Now, and there was a lot of lobbying to actually allow us to do that. Now, the difficulty back then was, in fact, the argument goes like this. The people in the export zones that doing export have imported machinery and raw material without duty.
Right.
If you open it up, it's unfair competition, right? Now, that has, by and large, now not really the issue. And now if you actually put the two together, there are actually huge advantages now for the Chinese economy.
Yeah.
I'll just cite two. First, if we want to stimulate domestic consumption, okay, there are a lot of products that are being manufactured only for export that the Chinese consumer get very, very low access to.
Right.
Okay, sometimes 油埠, it goes exported to France
Right.
and then re-imported.
Or come to Hong Kong to
Yeah,
buy.
I tell you a joke that we had even in the old days. It's called 香港一日遊 one day excursion trip to Hong Kong.
Yep.
That's in our Toys R Us operation.
Oh.
There's a lot of toys manufactured in China, of course, especially in the PRD.
Yep.
But because we couldn't sell in our stores in Toys R Us in China, so we export the product to Hong Kong.
Okay.
Turn around one day, you re-import it. That's how you have to do it.
Right.
Now, it kind of worked, except it added 15% to our cost.
Right.
You see the issue?
Yeah.
Now, if you combine the two, all these products that are now exclusively for export are now available. So there's a lot of stuff, frankly, 價廉物美, available to the Chinese consumer. I think that will be another round of stimulation for the domestic Chinese consumer.
Lower cost.
And it will allow a lot of Hong Kong businesses that have export factories to create that new market that we've always been talking about on Chinese domestic consumption.
Right.
Now, the second point, which is very important, I think, from a Chinese overall exports concern, is the whole issue of economy of scale. If you look at the successful, trading powers in the world, like Japan and Germany, the history has always been creating a domestic market and then leveraging that domestic market onto the global arena. And it's always like that. China actually created an external market with no reference to the domestic, if you think about it. And the domestic also came up.
Right.
Now, if you join the two, I think it's going to be really a very big advantage. The economy of scale, I think, of joining domestic demand and global demand, I think will be tremendous. So it would actually make Chinese exports even more competitive globally.
Right.
And really opening up that, and also be able to use the products to stimulate domestic demand. And I think in the midst of all this, I think if you think of that as, I think to me, the core thing that needs to be tackled in the intersection between the domestic circulation and international circulation, it's this. Now we have a name for it. It's 內外貿一體化.
Okay.
It's really the two sectors of the manufacturing put into one.
Right.
And why do you distinguish between factories that sell domestically and the ones that sell internationally? I think the place that the dual circulation will be implemented will be in the Greater Bay Area as the most important initial trial point.
Oh.
And that opens up a huge opportunity for Hong Kong and Hong Kong businesses. All our SMEs that have factories just across the border, making this shift into, when they combine and open up. I think that's really, I think, where we can actually play a major role and would be a great opportunity to develop for ourselves.
Can I just clarify that? So this is obviously something that should be done, but are you saying that you are seeing this probably will be done? As
You're asking a sensitive question. I think it's certainly being considered.
Right.
I think it has to be a series of discussions. And where the barriers are today, and I'll be, if you're interested, it's to do with standards.
I see.
It's no longer the tax. The tax has been equalized substantially because of the VAT and et cetera. it's in the issue of standards. Because when you manufacture a cup for export, you're satisfying overseas standards, US standards, European standards. China has its own standards. GB, 国标.
Right.
Yeah, 国标 standards. So now I'm not saying which is more tougher, they're just different. You know, maybe they test 10 things and they test 10 things, maybe 5 overlap and 5 are different. You see, it's the issue of the need to harmonization of standards.
Wow.
So that if I can actually manufacture something that satisfies the safety and so on of these countries, is accepted, and vice versa. Yeah, I'm sure any country will ask for reciprocity. So it goes again to the background of the need for a multilateral world, where you can actually get people to think about harmonization of standards.
Okay.
So what's preventing an immediate merging of the export manufacturing sector and the domestic manufacturing sector, I think now is the issue of standards.
That's very interesting. And you talk about the multilateral sort of structure, and we got to go into this next area of topic is RCEP. RCEP obviously is a big topic again.
Another
2
favorite
minutes.
topic of mine.
Yeah, exactly. Another huge topic. To see, you know, what do you see Hong Kong? How do we sort of, you know, we are not part of it yet. China, obviously China is, and we're trying to get a membership. But what does it mean to Hong Kong? You know, now that RCEP is, you know, forming.
Okay. Yeah.
Another 2 hours.
Maybe 2 hours.
2 hours.
Okay. Let me just put it in perspective. I think RCEP is the largest free trade agreement that has been negotiated in the world. And we have just completed it. I think it is perhaps the most important thing that's happened to the world in global trade since the conclusion of the Uruguay round.
Wow.
Now, so I want to tell you how significant it is in the global trading field. Now, we all know what RCEP is. It's the 10 countries of ASEAN plus China, Japan, Korea, and then Australia, New Zealand. 10 plus 5. Now, it's a third of the world's population, just under about 30%, and then a third of the world's GDP. And it's really, you know, a significant part of the world, you know, about the same percentage of the world trade. Now, what is really significant about RCEP is coming especially at this time in the global environment, where the global system is pretty much under complete pressure, right? The WTO is really now struggling to even function. I think we need a reconstruction of the new multilateral trading system. I think the RCEP is going to be the core that could help in the reconstruction of the entire global system.
Oh, wow.
Now, so that's the significance globally. Let's talk regional and for Hong Kong. I think RCEP is going to be a boon to regional trade, and especially giving focus to the big thing that you and I have talked about a lot, which is the rise of Asian consumption. As you know, Asia 20 years ago accounted for maybe a third of the global consumption. All the forecasts is 20 years from now, 2040, Asia will be more than 50% of global consumption.
Wow.
This will be the largest consumer market in the world. In fact, McKinsey forecasts that there will be 3 billion middle-class consumers in Asia by 2030, in fact, you know, in a very short period of time. So this is huge. And what RCEP really does is to put together a free trade area. And if you think about it, it is the only trading region that has both the production capacity and the demand in one place.
I see.
And really, it's going to facilitate dramatically the movement of intra-regional trade, intra-regional and investment. Whenever you can trade, is always investment. Trade and investment is two sides of the same coin. You don't talk about trade without investment and investment without trade.
Okay.
I'm talking about FDI, of course, not financial.
Yeah.
So So I think it's going to be a boon to regional. And I think this, in my mind, without exception, will be the fastest growing economic region in the world. You know, and China is at the center of it, driving a lot. Everybody is really now focused on where the demand is all here, production is here, etc. Now that is not to say that we want to cut off. This whole idea is so powerful because it's built on the concept of open regionalism.
Okay.
And very, very inclusive. It is not a rich man's club in which we're members, and then if I don't like you, you cannot join.
Okay.
It's really open regionalism where the barriers to entry is very low.
I see.
Relatively low. Let's say relatively. I won't use the word very low. Relatively low. So that means the rich countries can be there easily, and then the developing economies can also join. In that sense, it's very inclusive. And it's also got major innovations for people, businesses like ourselves, because they are really making it very easy to define very practical things like country of origin. They're defining a new concept, let's call it made in RCEP.
I see.
Where you can ship back and forth with very low duty. And the barrier, the bar is very low. If you have 40% local content, meaning within anywhere in RCEP, it qualifies as an RCEP product. And you can ship anywhere within RCEP, with a very low duty. And that duty is scheduled to phase out over 20 years. So there'll be zero duty shipping these products within RCEP in 20 years.
Right.
Can you imagine the opportunity for people to, frankly, to have access to the big demands like China, for the other countries? So it's actually an open regionalism. That's why I say it may form the core to actually now of really redoing the new multilateralism for the whole world.
Setting as an example, basically.
Yeah, and also expanding. And I can see that more and more members, and hopefully after this, India would be part of it, and then along the Belt and Road.
I see.
And then
okay.
and then you see, and RCEP could actually increase, and then maybe do a deal with Europe, and then America, where things, maybe the way to now create practically a truly new multilateral system is to think in terms of regions. You do RCEP in Asia and make it very vibrant and very open regionalism. You've got the EU in Europe, and you got the USMCA, the United States, Canada, Mexico, the new NAFTA in the US. They all have their own internal circulation, I'll use this word.
Yeah.
And then you link it all together into a global whole.
Right.
So I think that may be the most practical way for us to move forward into a new multilateralism.
Some people say that there's a long way between RCEP to, let's say, the sort of economic integration like EU or,
Yeah, or even TPP.
Or even TPP.
Or the CPTPP, the new TPP.
Do you see that they are getting more integrated over time, or do you see that the membership would expand?
The membership, I would say, let's get more members in, get the mass,
Okay.
and then upgrade over time.
I see.
And I think the RCEP has a lot of things to say about intellectual property and things like that. So it's moving in that direction.
Right.
And also trade in services.
Yeah.
So, but one thing I would say is it's vital for Hong Kong to really be part of RCEP, and especially in the first wave within the next 18 months. And I know the government is working very hard. I think we should all need to lobby for Hong Kong to be part of RCEP.
Yep.
And do everything we can, because Hong Kong can be the center of the RCEP whole region and really play a critical role, both to benefit RCEP and benefit ourselves.
Thanks so much, Dr. Fung, for your insightful and inspiring comments today. Thanks so much.